Are you aware that there are 4 ways to give according to the Bible? Deuteronomy 12 verse 6 says, "There, bring your tithes and special gifts, what you have vowed to give, and your free will offerings." There are the 4 types of giving that we can give according to the Word of God. First is the tithe. Second are special gifts. Third are vows and pledges. And finally, the 4th one is free will offerings. Now, people are surprised to find this in the Bible because some have been falsely taught that the Old Testament teaches tithing and the New Testament teaches free will offerings. Wrong. Both the Old and New Testament teaches tithing and free will offerings. Yet some people seem to exclude one over the other. I want you to notice the list that the apostle, or really the prophet Moses gives us. The list tells us clearly which is the most important of the gifts. First is tithing, because here's what it comes down to. If you don't tithe, then there's no way to give a free will offering, because all you're doing is you're robbing God in order to give a free will offering, and that free will offering is no longer a free will offering. You can't rob Peter to pay Paul. So tithing is first on the list because it is the first fruits. And if it's the first fruits, not the second, it has to come first. So the first way we give, according to the Word of God, is we give the first 10% of everything that we earn, everything that's given to us. Then we can give special gifts. It's a special gift because it's not ordinary. It's not like a tithe where you do it every time you get a money or every time you get a gift from somebody. This is something you give extraordinary, just something that you do. The third one is vows. These are pledges you make and a commitment to God. Maybe in your church it's a building fund where you're giving every month to provide for that building fund. Then the final gift is free will offerings. Now, free will offerings are generally gifts given to the poor. We find that in 2 Corinthians chapter 9 when Paul is receiving a free will offering for the poor. And what does he say? Each one should give what he's decided to give. And so people will read 2 Corinthians 9 and they would say, well, free will offerings is not tithing. Well, of course it's not tithing. It's an offering to the poor, but it doesn't exclude the necessity of tithing. So when people say, well, I'm not under the law, therefore I don't have to tithe. Well, friend, if that's your argument, then you also don't have to give free will offerings because the law included free will offerings. So it's inconsistent to say you're exempt from the tithing, the first gift, but you still have to do the 4th one. No, friend, both tithing and free will offerings are taught in the New Testament. I had someone said online, I'll give $500 to anyone who could show me that we're supposed to tithe, and you have to show it to me in the New Testament. I gave him Matthew 23:23 and said you could send the check to Word of Life Church. He said, oh, well, Matthew is not in the New Testament. I'm thinking, oh man, now he's moving the goalposts. I prove it to him, but now he doesn't want to abide by his commitment. See, somebody said, well, what do you mean it's in the New Testament? Matthew 23:23, Jesus says, woe to you teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. What did Jesus say? You should practice the latter. What's the latter? Justice and mercy and faithfulness without neglecting the former. What's the former? Giving a tithe. There Jesus affirms both the importance of showing justice, mercy, and faithfulness, but don't do it and exclude tithing. So this passage makes it quite clear that Jesus affirmed tithing. Now somebody said, well, no, he's speaking to the teachers of the law and Pharisees. All right, stop for a moment. He also told them to show justice, mercy, and faithfulness, which is the latter. He said you should practice the latter, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. So are you exempt from showing justice, mercy, and faithfulness? Well, no, that I ought to do. Then why do you exempt yourself from the latter or the former? Jesus said you should practice the latter without neglecting the former. See, you're being a hypocrite when you say you should practice justice, mercy, and faithfulness, half of the verse, but you won't want to practice the other half. No, tithing is also taught by the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 9, where he says that the tithing that went to support the ministers of the Levites should now go to support those preaching the gospel. But for those who say, well, Jesus' words, they're not for us. Really? Of course they're for us. They're for everyone. And don't make an excuse because he spoke it to Pharisees that you're exempt from it. If that's your argument, then you're going to have to get rid of almost the entire New Testament, because many of Jesus' words are not spoken to disciples, but to the Sanhedrin, to Pharisees, to teachers of the law. We won't even have much of our Bible if we didn't have Jesus' words to the Pharisees and Sadducees. For example, only one place Jesus said to be born again, and he said that to Nicodemus, a Pharisee. So are you exempt from the need to be born again because he didn't tell that to the disciples, but to a Pharisee? Do you see how stupid that is? When Jesus got into a debate with the Pharisees about divorce and remarriage, in Matthew chapter 18, verse 10, what does Jesus say? What did the disciples say? They said, well, Lord, if this is a situation, it's better not to even marry. Notice, even though Jesus was not talking to the apostles, but only to the Pharisees, the disciples did not rationalize and say, well, I'm glad he spoke that to the Pharisees, not to us. They still understood whatever message he gave to them still belongs to us. You see, this is inconsistent. The parable of the Good Samaritan was given to the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. Does that mean you're exempt from following the parable of the Good Samaritan because it wasn't given directly to his disciples? And how about the parable of the prodigal son? Jesus' most famous parable. He gave it to the Pharisees who were standing outside the house, and he gave them the parable to show them that they're the elder brother complaining about their younger brothers getting saved. Are you exempt from that parable because he gave it to the Pharisees? And how about Jesus, who said, give unto God the things that are God and to Caesar the things that are Caesar's? He gave that as an answer to a teacher of the law and who wanted to know whether they should pay taxes or not. Do you get that? Actually, to the Herodians, and he's trying to show them. Does that mean that message is to the Herodians only, not to us? Do you see how ridiculous that is? And then finally, of course, Jesus teaching on the greatest commandment. Love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. He gave that in response to a teacher of the law that asked him, what's the greatest commandment? Do you then take that statement of Christ and say it doesn't belong to us because he gave it to a teacher of the law? Do you see how ridiculous? Jesus said, he that's without sin cast the first stones. It wasn't his disciples that had the stones. It was the Jewish leaders that had stones to stone the woman. Do you say, I don't have to abide by that teaching because it wasn't given to a disciple? Do you see how ludicrous it becomes? No, Jesus said you should practice justice, mercy, and faithfulness without neglecting the former. That is, without neglecting tithing. So Jesus affirmed tithing. He affirmed free will offerings. He affirmed it all. And friend, if you want to please God and see his blessings, you need to practice all four kinds of giving: tithing, special gifts, vows, and yes, free will offerings.